Up here in these hollers, we never did put much stock in a plastic tub of yogurt from the grocery store. Not because we didn't know what protein was, we just knew it by a different name. We called it supper, and we knew where to find it, growing wild along every creek bank in these mountains, free for the taking, if a body knew how to look. I want to tell you something my granny used to say, and it stuck with me my whole life. She'd say, "The mountain feeds them that know her and starves them that don't." That's the whole of it right there. That's the difference between walking past a creek bank and seeing nothing but weeds and walking past that same creek bank and seeing a full larder standing up out of the ground, just waiting. Let's start at the creek, because that's where this all begins. If you've ever hiked along a shaded Appalachian stream, you've walked right past what most folks would pay good money for at one of them health food stores in the city. Lamb's quarters, chickweed, growing thick in the damp, shaded dirt where the creek keeps the ground soft and cool. Most folks call it a weed. We called it dinner. Lamb's quarters has been feeding mountain families since before there was a United States to speak of. It grows up along disturbed ground, creek banks, old garden edges, anywhere the soil's been turned and left a little tender. And chickweed, that low tangling little plant with the tiny white star flowers, that one loves the shade right along the water where the frost don't bite so hard and the moisture never quite leaves the ground. Now here's the thing that would have surprised my granny, though she wouldn't have been surprised at all, on account of she already knew these plants were good eating. The protein in these wild greens holds its own against store-bought dairy. Plain, non-fat Greek yogurt, the kind folks buy by the case now thinking it's the peak of good eating, carries a little over 10 grams of protein per 100 grams, and these creekside greens, eaten young and tender, come up right alongside it, pound for pound. That's a weed most folks would spray poison on, standing toe-to-toe with something sold in a fancy tub with a fancy label. We didn't need a label. We had a creek. Now let's talk about what grows up out of the ground instead of down along it. The mushrooms. Along them same shaded creek beds where the old logs go soft and the air stays damp, you'll find oyster mushrooms fanning out along a fallen tree like little gray shelves, and chicken of the woods blazing up orange and yellow against the bark like something set on fire. These aren't just interesting to look at, these are food, and good food at that. Raw oyster mushrooms carry right around 3 1/3 grams of protein per 100 grams, and that's just where it starts. Some of these wild mushrooms, chicken of the woods among them, can run higher still, up into the range of what you'd find in a good cut of meat. We're talking mushrooms that, gram for gram, stand up next to what most folks think you can only get from an animal. And they're growing wild, on a dead log, for free, for anybody willing to look close and know what they're looking at. That's the thing that gets me thinking on it now. There's whole families up and down these hollers going without buying processed protein powder in a plastic jug when there's a fallen poplar down by the creek wearing a coat of oyster mushrooms thick enough to feed a supper table. Let me take you further along the bank now, because the creek don't just give up greens and mushrooms, it gives up alliums too. Ramps, wild onions, if you've never smelled a ramp patch coming up in early spring. You've missed one of the finest smells God ever made. That sharp oniony garlic smell rising up out of the leaf litter before the trees have even leafed out proper. Ramps love that same damp shaded ground the chickweed loves, that same creek-fed soil that never quite dries all the way. Where you find one, you generally find the others close by. That's how it works in these mountains. The moisture and the shade draw a whole community of plants together like neighbors settling near the same well. And that's the heart of what I want you to understand today. It's not one plant, one mushroom, one green. standing alone out there being useful. It's a whole creekside pantry, standing together, each one bringing something a little different to the table. That's how the mountain always fed us. Never with just one thing, always with a gathering. Now let's step back off the creek bank a moment and look up into the trees, because the mountain didn't stop at greens and mushrooms. It gave us the nuts, too, and I want to tell you, before there was ever such a thing as a protein bar wrapped up in foil and sold at a gas station counter, there was a hickory tree. Hickory nuts, beech nuts, chestnuts back before the blight took so many of the old chestnut stands, though there's still some standing here and there for them that know where to look. These nuts carry protein right alongside good, honest fat, the kind that burns slow and steady, not the kind that spikes you up and drops you down within the hour. A handful of hickory nuts, cracked out by hand the way my granny used to do sitting on the porch of an evening, will carry a body a long way down a mountain trail. That's not a health trend. That's just what got the old-timers through a long day of work, back when there wasn't a gas station on every corner selling a candy bar dressed up as fitness food. Now, I want to bring you back down to that creek bank one more time, because I promised you a salad, and a mountain woman keeps her promises. Take them tender young lamb's quarters leaves, and take that chickweed, picked before it goes to flower and gets a little bitter, and you've got the makings of a fine little salad, eaten right there raw if you're minded to, or wilted down, soft in a pan with a little fat if you'd rather it cooked. Either way, you're getting more than just protein. You're getting iron in there too, and vitamin C, all bundled up in a green that don't cost you hardly any calories at all. That's a heavy load of good nutrition riding on the back of a plant most folks step clean over without a second look. And here's where it gets interesting, because I know some of you are thinking about that Greek yogurt I mentioned a while back and wondering if these wild things can really stand up next to it. Take that creekside salad, the lamb's quarters, and the chickweed, and set it alongside a good gathering of them foraged mushrooms, the oysters, and the chicken of the woods, and you've built yourself a meal that don't just rival that tub of yogurt. Put together right, that combination can match or even beat it, protein against calorie, and it comes with something that tub of yogurt never could offer you. It comes with a whole range of different building blocks, different amino acids, different minerals, all working together instead of leaning on one single source the way dairy does. That's a thing worth sitting with a minute. When you're getting your protein from just one place, one animal, one dairy cow, standing in one field eating one kind of feed, yeah, you're only getting what that one source has to give. But when you're gathering your protein up off a creek bank, a little from the greens, a little from the mushrooms, a little from the nuts up in the hickory trees, you're getting a whole chorus of different amino acids and minerals, each one bringing something the others don't. That's not an accident. That's how the mountain always worked. Diversity was the whole plan, whether anybody back then had a word for it or not. And I'll tell you something else, something that mattered a great deal to the families that come before us up here, and matters just as much now if you ask me. This food don't come wrapped in plastic. It don't come off a truck that drove 3 states to get here. There's no feedlot standing behind a mushroom growing wild on a fallen log. There's no packaging plant behind a patch of chickweed coming up along the water. What you gather off that creek bank comes to you straight out of the mountain itself, with nothing standing between you and where it grew. That's about as honest as food gets. Now, I want to talk a minute about why this all matters beyond just the eating of it, because there's a history here that runs a good deal deeper than a trend. Up in these hollers, our people didn't forage because it was fashionable. They foraged because there were lean seasons, hard winters, years when the garden didn't come in like it ought to, and a family needed to know what the mountain had to offer when the smokehouse was running thin. Them wild greens and mushrooms and nuts weren't a hobby. They were a safety net, quiet and green and standing along every creek in the county, ready for whoever knew how to read the ground. That knowledge got passed hand to hand, grandmother to daughter, out along the creek path while gathering greens for supper, not out of a book. And I'll be honest with you, a good deal of that knowledge has slipped away these last decades. Fewer folks walking the creek banks, fewer folks teaching their young ones what's good eating and what ain't. It grieves me some thinking on how much of it has gone quiet, but I'll tell you what gives me some comfort. There's younger folks out there now picking this back up, walking them same paths their great grandmothers walked, learning to see the mountain the way we always saw her. That does my heart good. But now I need to slow down and say the most important thing in this whole telling, because everything I've said up to now don't mean a thing without this next part. These mountains do not hand out their gifts without a warning attached. For every good green growing along that creek bank, there is very often something that looks a good deal like it standing close by, and some of them look-alikes are not friendly at all. That goes for the greens. That goes double, maybe triple, for the mushrooms. There are mushrooms growing wild in these hills that would put a body in the ground, and some of them favor a good many folks think they've got a match figured, when what they've really got is a dangerous mistake dressed up in a familiar shape. So here is the one rule that matters more than any other rule I could give you today. Never eat a wild plant or a wild mushroom unless you are certain, dead certain, sure of what it is. Not fairly sure, not pretty sure, certain. That means learning from somebody who's spent years walking these hollers and knows the ground, or working from a proper trusted guide with clear pictures and clear detail, not a half-remembered notion passed along secondhand. Mushrooms especially. There's no shortcut there. The old women who taught this to their daughters didn't teach it quick, and they didn't teach it careless. They taught it slow, over seasons, walking the same ground again and again until the plants and the mushrooms became as familiar as family. That is still the right way to learn it. Not overnight, not off one video. Slow and careful and certain. I say all that not to scare you off the creek bank, but to honor it rightly. The mountain feeds them that know her, like my granny said. But she don't forgive carelessness, and she never did. So when you walk along one of these Appalachian creeks and you see that low green tangle of chickweed catching the shade, or that dusty gray-green lamb's quarters standing up along the disturbed dirt, or a shelf of oyster mushrooms fanning out along a fallen log, I want you to see it the way we always saw it up here. Not a weed, not a nuisance growing wild and useless. A pantry, a quiet, patient, free pantry that's been feeding mountain families since before anybody thought to write down a recipe, standing right there along the water, waiting on somebody who still remembers how to look. That's the heart of what we're trying to keep alive here, session after session, story after story, not just the plants themselves, but the way of seeing that goes with them, the knowing. That's what's slipping away faster than the plants ever could. And that's what we're trying to hold on to, one story at a time.